Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, where curiosity curls up under a blanket, and even the wildest what-ifs can gently wander into dreams. Tonight's story might sound a little adventurous, but don't worry, it's wrapped in softness and wonder, because we're taking a slow, sleepy stroll into the tiny footsteps of an extraordinary invader, the Amazonian ant. Yes, those legendary ants from the rainforests of South America, marching with purpose, living in rivers of movement, suddenly appearing on the soils of the United States. Not a horror story, but a question wrapped in nature, science, and imagination. What would happen if they came? How would our forests, our fields, our cities change? And how do such tiny creatures carry such big impact? But before we begin, I'd love to know, have you ever followed a line of ants? Just watched them weave, without end, carrying bits of the world on their backs? Have you ever wondered what it's like to live in their world? Or how a single colony could ripple through an entire ecosystem? If you find this kind of sleepy science soothing, I'd be ever so grateful if you tap the like button, or maybe subscribe to this cozy corner of the internet. It helps this gentle journey reach others who might need a peaceful pause before bed too. So now, settle in. Let your thoughts grow small and still. Let the worries of the day shrink down to the size of a grain of sand. And together, let's follow the trail, one soft step at a time, into the forests, the fields, and the quiet possibility of what might happen if Amazonian ants came to America. Take a slow, deep breath. Feel the day's tensions melt away. As you exhale, imagine we are stepping into a warm, tropical night. In the distance, you can almost hear the faint chorus of crickets and the whisper of leaves. We're about to meet some tiny yet extraordinary creatures, ants from the Amazon rainforest, and follow their unlikely journey to a new world. Along the way, we'll learn about their behavior and roles in nature, envision how they might affect new places, and reflect on how balance is found even when nature's fiercest little warriors roam far from home. Throughout this journey, you are safe and relaxed, merely an observer floating above the ground, watching with gentle curiosity. As we wander through these visions, we'll keep a slow, soothing pace. There will be no rush, no alarm, only wonder and understanding. Every creature, even a mighty ant, has its place in the grand tapestry of nature. Even changes and surprises in ecosystems can eventually settle into harmony. By the end of our journey, you may find that what first sounded scary, Amazonian ants invading new lands, can become an intriguing, almost lulling tale when seen through the right lens. So, let your eyes grow heavy and your mind drift easily. The Sleepy Scientist is here to guide you, speaking in a soft rhythm. Let's begin our exploration, stepping quietly into the twilight of the Amazon and beyond, together. Imagine yourself deep in an Amazon rainforest late in the evening. The air is warm and thick with the scent of earth after a rain. High above, silver stars peek through breaks in the canopy. All around, life is stirring gently. In this tranquil scene, we find our protagonists, the Amazonian ants. They may be small in size, but in this hushed moment, they loom large in importance. Let's meet a few of these remarkable ants as they go about their nightly routines, each with its own story under the moonlight. First, the bullet ant, Hormiga 24. On the trunk of a giant rainforest tree, a lone bullet ant, scientifically Paraponera clavata, wanders with deliberate purpose. She is nearly an inch long, a true giant among ants, with a shiny reddish-black body that almost blends into the bark's shadows. You might mistake her for a wingless wasp at first glance, given her size and formidable jaws. Despite the late hour, she's active. Bullet ants often prefer the nighttime for foraging. Watch as she climbs upward along the tree's buttressed roots and into the canopy. Bullet ants live in small colonies, usually only a few hundred individuals, nesting at the base of trees in the rich soil. They are solitary hunters by nature. You won't see long lines of them marching out together. Instead, each bullet ant worker roams on her own, relying on keen senses to find food. What do they seek in the darkness? Perhaps a drop of sweet nectar from a night-blooming flower, or a caterpillar nibbling on a leaf. Bullet ants are omnivores. They'll prey on other insects and spiders when they can, yet also gently sip plant sap or nectar from the forest's offerings. As our bullet ant friend pauses at a cluster of blossoms, she gathers a bead of nectar between her mandibles, a sugary treasure to carry home. In the stillness, we marvel at her strength. Despite being alone, she navigates the towering tree with ease, a tiny explorer in a vast arboreal world. We also notice the famous tool she carries, a stinger at the tip of her abdomen, one of the most potent in the insect kingdom. Locals call her the 24-hour ant because a sting from a bullet ant can bring waves of pain lasting a full day. But rest assured, she has no interest in us high above in observation, and she uses her venom only to defend herself or subdue prey. For now, under the dim light, she is peaceful, focused on her nectar prize. She moves on, disappearing into the leaves, heading back toward her hidden nest at the tree's base. Next, the army ant, nature's tiny legion. Not far away on the forest floor, there's a subtle rustling, as if the leaves themselves are alive. If we cast our gentle lantern light downward, we see them, a living river of ants flowing over the ground. These are army ants, for example, Eciton species, famous for their massive swarms and relentless foraging raids. By day or night, depending on the species, army ants move in coordinated columns thousands strong. But unlike most ants, they have no permanent home nest to return to each night. Instead, they are the home. At dusk, they will form a bivouac, a temporary living nest made of their own bodies linked together, protecting the queen and brood within. For now, though, the colony is on the move, in its nomadic phase. We watch quietly from above as countless tiny soldiers march forward. There's no single leader barking orders, yet their collective behavior is perfectly tuned. They fan out in a broad front, a broad arrowhead of ants sweeping the forest floor. As they advance, insects hidden in the leaf litter spring away in panic. Crickets, beetles, spiders, all scurrying to escape the oncoming horde. Many will not escape. Army ants are the ultimate team hunters. They overwhelm prey with sheer numbers. Anything that cannot run or fly fast enough might be caught, from other ants and spiders to scorpions, beetle larvae, and even the occasional small lizard or frog. It sounds fierce, but in the soft narrative of our journey, think of it as nature's cleanup crew passing through. In their homeland, army ants are sometimes called marabunta, and the entire ecosystem knows when the swarm approaches. You might be surprised to learn that these rampaging ants actually create opportunities for other animals. Listen closely. Above the crackle of leaves, you might hear wing beats and chirps. By day, birds called antbirds and others follow the swarms, feasting on insects that leap out of the way of the ants. In our nighttime scene, perhaps a curious opossum sniffs at the moving column, hoping to snag a stray insect fleeing the commotion. The army ants themselves march on, unaware of the entourage they attract. Their coordination is almost poetic, a tapestry of tiny lives moving as one. In the heart of that living stream is their queen, wingless and well guarded, capable of laying millions of eggs each month. giving rise to a colony millions strong. This incredible reproductive power makes army ant colonies some of the largest among ants. As we float above, we appreciate that we are witnessing a keystone of the jungle in action. For in the Amazon, an army ant swarm is a regular event that keeps the environment in balance. Soon, they will rest and form a bivouac again, and the forest floor will grow quiet until their next march. And there, the leafcutter ants, tiny gardeners of the forest. Our eyes drift to another gentle movement. Along the shadowy trail on the ground, we see what looks like a procession of green flags bobbing up and down. It's as if the forest itself has sprouted little moving leaves. But of course, this is the famous column of leafcutter ants, genera Atta or Acromyomex, each ant carrying a cut piece of leaf above its head like an umbrella. In the dim forest light, these fragments catch any stray moonbeam, creating a dreamy line of floating green patches. Leafcutter ants are among the most industrious and socially complex of all insects, second only to humans, some say, in the scale of their farms and cities. As we observe their parade, we notice the different sizes of workers, small ones and larger soldier escorts. They move in well-worn paths, highways cleared through the understory that can stretch 30 meters or more from the nest. Even now at night, the column is active. Leafcutters work day and night, ceaseless in their harvesting. But they do not eat the leaves they cut. Instead, each ant is like a tiny farmer. These leaves are carried back to an underground nest, a vast hidden metropolis of chambers and tunnels, where they will serve as fertilizer for the ant's precious crop, a special fungus. Deep below, in chambers safe from drying air, the leafcutter ants cultivate fungus gardens on the chewed leaf pulp, and that fungus is the true food that feeds the colony. It's a beautiful mutualism. The ants feed and care for the fungus, and in return, the fungus provides nourishment for the ants. We might imagine that if we could shrink ourselves to their scale and walk among them, we would smell a sweet, earthy scent of mushrooms mixed with the tang of cut leaves in those underground gardens. A mature leafcutter colony can be astonishingly large, millions of ants residing in a network of chambers that can spread over an area as big as a small house and reach nearly 10 feet deep into the earth. In fact, the largest central chamber, where the main fungus garden and the queen reside, can be so big that a human could stand up inside it if the soil roof were removed. But on this gentle night, we only see the surface evidence of that subterranean world. Multiple mounds of soil marking nest entrances, and the constant stream of leafcutters going to and fro. They carry bits of leaves, flower petals, and even tender bark, whatever their fungus needs. The effect they have on the forest is significant. Leafcutters are the dominant herbivores here, cutting more fresh vegetation than perhaps any other animals. Scientists estimate that in some tropical forests, Atta leafcutter ants alone prune away 12 to 17% of all new leaves produced each year. It's as if they are the forest's tiny gardening crew, trimming and collecting. Yet, this intense pruning doesn't ruin the jungle. In fact, it can stimulate new growth, much like careful pruning can make a garden plant grow back bushier. The leafcutters, by harvesting leaves and tending fungus, also return nutrients to the soil and aerate it with their vast tunnels, enriching the earth and shaping the plant community. Around them, as we watch their green convoy under the stars, there is a sense of order and purpose. Each little ant carries a piece of the forest, and together they carry the forest's future, quite literally cultivating the cycle of life below ground. It's oddly soothing to witness this steady, purposeful toil continuing as the night deepens. In the soft chorus of the Amazon night, these ants, the bullet ant, the army ant, the leafcutter, are like characters in a quiet play, each has its role. The solitary huntress with a mighty sting, the roving army that stirs up the understory, the farmer tending living gardens. They have thrived here for millions of years, woven into the fabric of their ecosystem. As we float as observers, we feel a growing appreciation for how diverse and fascinating Amazonian ants are. They can be fearsome in reputation, yes, but here in their home they are simply at home, doing what they do best. There is nothing malicious in their actions. A bullet ant's sting or an army ant's raid is not evil, but survival. And survival in the lush but competitive Amazon requires remarkable adaptations. Our mind's eye holds these images gently. The glint of a bullet ant's glossy body disappearing into the roots, the flow of an army ant swarm like a dark ribbon on the ground, the procession of leaf fragments bobbing en route to an underground city. Keep these in your thoughts as we continue. Now that we've met our Amazonian ant friends in their native realm, we can carry that understanding forward. We will imagine what might happen if, one day, some of these ants found themselves in a completely new environment, far from the Amazon's familiar embrace. Remember, we'll carry the same calm and curious perspective onward. Let's take another deep breath. Feel the humid jungle air transform into the warm breeze of a different place, and follow the ant's journey across the ocean. Imagine waking up on a warm summer morning in a small town in Florida or rural Louisiana. The sun is rising. The dew is on the grass. You step out to fetch the newspaper. Yes, in our gentle tale, some still do that. And you notice something unusual by the front walk, a trail of leaf fragments being carried by ants across your lawn. To your sleepy eyes, it almost looks like the grass is moving by itself, a few pieces of green leaf trekking steadily toward the shrubs. Curious, you crouch down. These aren't the usual tiny sugar ants or fire ants, you know. They're larger, reddish-brown, each carrying a piece of leaf, like a tiny parasol. You recall seeing something like this on a nature documentary about the Amazon. Could it be? Are these leaf-cutter ants in your yard? As our scenario becomes reality for local residents, human life intersects with the Amazonian ants in numerous ways. Let's explore these interactions in a calm, step-by-step manner, assessing the potential consequences for human life, agriculture, homes, and health. Remember, we frame this as a bedtime story. So even as we discuss problems, we'll also talk about solutions and reassurance. After all, even nature's fiercest creatures can be understood and managed with knowledge and respect. In our backyards and homes, for people living in areas now inhabited by Amazonian ants, daily life might require some adjustments. One of the most immediate issues is the risk of stings or bites. Bullet ants, with their extremely painful stings, could be a concern if their nests are near homes or footpaths. A single sting from a bullet ant has been described as excruciating. Like walking over flaming charcoal with a nail in your heel, to quote entomologist Justin Schmidt. The pain, while intense, usually subsides after a day or so without long-term harm. But it's certainly not something one would want to experience unexpectedly while gardening or playing in the yard. So, if bullet ants become established in a neighborhood, people would quickly learn to be cautious around tree bases or wood piles where these ants might nest. One might choose to wear shoes instead of sandals when walking in the yard, or teach children not to disturb any large ants they see. Just as folks in fire ant country know not to stand on a fire ant mound, lest they get multiple stings that burn and itch, those in bullet ant territory would learn to identify the bullets' nesting areas and give them a respectful berth. On the bright side, bullet ants are not aggressive unless provoked. They don't swarm aggressively like fire ants do. So if you don't step on their nest or grab one by accident, you could live alongside bullet ants and rarely if ever get stung. In a way, they are almost polite neighbours, formidable, but not looking for trouble. Over time, Residents might even appreciate seeing a bullet ant patrolling a tree, knowing it's hunting pests. However, any incident, say a child accidentally leaning against a tree and being stung, would likely prompt pest control calls to remove that nest. Army ants entering homes could be both a nuisance and a strange surprise. Remember that anecdote of army ants clearing houses of pests? In modern suburban settings, that might play out like this. You come home to find a swarm of small ants streaming through your kitchen and living room. It would be startling, perhaps frightening, to see tens of thousands of ants on the move. But if you pause, you notice they aren't lingering on your food or biting the furniture, or you. They seem focused on chasing down cockroaches, spiders, and even the occasional mouse that can't escape them. Indeed, army ants have no interest in our human food crumbs. They want meat, other arthropods, etc. So, a person might vacate the house for a couple of hours and let the swarm pass. When it's gone, they find that the cupboards are free of roaches and the attic has fewer silverfish. It's an unnerving way to get a cleaning done, but some might come to see it as a bizarre natural service, albeit one most people would prefer to prevent or avoid. In reality, most folks would probably call an exterminator at the first sight of an army ant incursion. Understandable, since a swarm doesn't exactly inspire calm. But from a bedtime story perspective, there's something almost enchanted about the idea of waking at night to a soft rustling, peeking with a flashlight, and seeing an army ant carpet flowing under the door and out through the back porch, leaving a tidier home in its wake. Perhaps one might check carefully that no pets or treasured critters, like a hamster in a cage, are at risk. But for healthy adult humans, army ants usually ignore big living beings unless provoked. Anecdotes from Central America note that people sometimes simply move aside and let the ants pass. They rarely suffer bites unless they try to interfere. Leafcutters in the garden would probably be the most visible and persistent presence. If you have a vegetable patch or fruit trees, you might wake up to find your rose bushes or citrus saplings completely stripped of leaves overnight. Leafcutter ants can defoliate a small tree or a section of a garden astonishingly fast. This could be disheartening for a gardener. You might also find their large mounds popping up in the lawn. Remember, their nests can be 2 to 3 feet tall mounds with many openings and span 100 feet across underground. Not only are these mounds unsightly, they can damage the roots of grass and ornamental plants due to the excavation. A big nest might even undermine pavement or cause minor settling in a yard. So homeowners would need new strategies, maybe placing physical barriers, moats or slippery bands, around prized plants to deter the ants, or using natural repellents. Some might resort to pesticides or baits specifically for leafcutters, which is challenging because of their fungus. One must use baits that the ants carry home that subtly poison the fungus, or the ants, without raising alarm. In Texas and across Latin America, people have dealt with leafcutters, sometimes called town ants or cut ants, for ages, protecting young trees with tar or lime on the trunk, or planting decoy crops to lure ants away from main crops. Our hypothetical American gardeners might take a page from those traditional methods. Perhaps neighborhoods start cooperative efforts to control nests, carefully digging them out if safe, or using biological controls, like certain pathogenic fungi that can wipe out leafcutter colonies without chemicals. For farmers, the presence of Amazonian ants could be a mixed bag. Let's consider agriculture. Crop damage. Leafcutter ants would be a known agricultural pest. In parts of Texas, even native leafcutters cause significant problems by defoliating crops and young pine seedlings. If Amazonian leafcutters spread widely, farmers might find that fields near ant nests suffer continuous leaf damage. Citrus orchards, for example, could have their trees defoliated repeatedly, reducing yields. A single leafcutter colony can harvest large amounts of foliage daily, so an infestation could feel like a plague of tiny locusts. We might hear of farmers losing a portion of their pasture grass to leaf cutters, or having to replant tree seedlings that are clipped down. Economically, this could push them to invest in pest control measures. Livestock and other ants. Bullet ants and fire ants both pose risks to livestock, especially the young. Fire ants are known to swarm newborn calves or hatchling birds, sometimes killing them or causing injury. Bullet ants don't swarm, but a curious calf nosing near a bullet ant nest could get a very painful surprise on the nose. It likely wouldn't be fatal, but it could cause swelling or lameness for a day. If dogs or horses encounter bullet ants, they too could be stung and feel intense pain. Pet owners and farmers would learn to keep animals away from known nests. Human labour, field workers picking crops might occasionally encounter these ants. Army ants rarely stay in one spot, so less an issue, but leafcutter foragers or bullet ants could be around. A bullet ant sting to a worker could be temporarily debilitating. One might need to sit out the rest of the day due to pain or swelling. Over time, workers might gear up with gloves and boots, much like beekeepers do when working in heavily infested fields. Some might build tolerance or at least familiarity. In parts of the Amazon, people learn how to avoid bullet ant encounters, and they might carry a home remedy for stings, like a certain leaf to chew or a topical salve to reduce pain. Perhaps such knowledge would cross over. Beneficial aspects. It's not all negative. Leafcutters, as we discussed, enrich soil and might prune weeds. If managed or kept at bay from crops, they could inadvertently help in a crop rotation or improve fallow field fertility by aerating and fertilizing soil. Army ants could reduce pest insects naturally. Imagine an army ant swarm moving through a cornfield, gobbling up caterpillars, corn earworms say, and other harmful bugs. This is uncontrolled and unpredictable, but it might give some natural pest relief. Bullet ants might reduce certain boring beetles or other crop pests too by preying on them around orchards. Farmers with a keen ecological mindset might attempt to harness these effects. For example, not killing an army ant colony that ranges through their land because they notice fewer pests when the ants come by, though few would want to rely on a wild predator so seemingly uncontrollable. Infrastructure and technology. Some ants, notably invasive crazy ants in the US, are known to infest electrical equipment and cause short circuits by chewing on insulation or clustering in switches. Fire ants also can clog irrigation lines and even short out transformers. How about our Amazonian ants? Leafcutters generally aren't drawn to electrical fields as far as we know. They prefer soil. Army ants likely would not nest in electronics. They need living space and moisture, not a closed box. Bullet ants could potentially wander into houses and maybe into walls, but they're not known for chewing wires or nesting in voids. They like soil and natural crevices. So perhaps in this scenario, electrical infrastructure might be spared the troubles that fire ants or crazy ants cause. However, if bullet ants nest near irrigation systems or HVAC units, a curious ant might crawl inside, looking for warmth or a path, possibly causing a minor short if it bridges contacts. Ants can cause shorts if they connect live circuits with their bodies. It would likely be a rare occurrence. The larger risk is to human systems like quarantines and trade. Areas found to have these invasive ants might face plant shipment restrictions. Just as fire ant-infested regions have rules on moving sod or plants to avoid shipping ants to new places, similar measures would be enacted. Nurseries might have to treat their stock with pesticides or implement protocols to ensure no ants hitchhike. This can be costly and inconvenient, but over time becomes part of the routine. State agricultural departments might set up monitoring and rapid response teams to eliminate newly found colonies in outlier areas to try to contain the spread. Public health. Aside from stings, which we've covered, painful but seldom life-threatening unless someone has a severe allergy, there's also the psychological factor. Fear of giant ants could cause stress for some communities. There might be sensational news stories, invasion of the Amazon ants, causing panic. Part of managing the scenario would be educating the public, explaining that these ants, while new, can be managed and coexisted with, much like bees or wasps. Over time, people would likely acclimate. Perhaps children in schools would learn about them in science class. Maybe even field trips or nature centres would showcase an enclosed leafcutter farm or a demonstration of a safely contained bullet ant, turning fear into fascination. We can envision that communities affected might rally together. Picture a neighbourhood meeting on a cool evening where residents compare notes on ant sightings. One neighbour says, "The ants took all the leaves off my hibiscus last night." And another responds, "Yes, they came through our yard too. I found their nest by the fence." Together, they might coordinate with local extension services to treat that nest responsibly. Meanwhile, a retired entomologist down the street might actually be excitedly observing and documenting these ants for science. In our calm exploration, we acknowledge the challenges. Nobody likes their garden ravaged or an unexpected sting. But we also see human ingenuity and adaptability coming into play. Over time, life would adjust. Homes might incorporate simple design tweaks. For instance, moats under table legs, or beehive-style ant guards on feeder poles to keep ants out of certain areas. Gardeners might plant sacrificial plants that leafcutters love in one corner to lure them away from the main garden, a trick some gardeners use for pests. Perhaps citizens develop an appreciation for these ants' positive side. Fewer roaches in sewers due to army ants, an interesting new species to observe for bug enthusiasts, and even the knowledge that these ants are part of the world's rich biodiversity now on our doorstep. One can imagine human ingenuity turning even to utilization. Could farmers use army ants by deliberately guiding swarms through fields as biocontrol? It sounds far-fetched, but in folklore, there are accounts of communities guiding driver ants in Africa by timing grass fires or laying trails of food to direct them. In a modern twist, maybe someone patents a swarm harness, a way to bait army ants into moving through a barn to clear pests, then out again, or an ant alarm system, harmlessly detecting army ant swarms approaching via sensors, then using gentle sound or scent repellents to keep them out of homes. Some natural substances might deter ants from crossing certain lines. All these possibilities underscore human resilience and creativity. While initial encounters with Amazonian ants might be startling or negative, as months and years pass, people learn. They share tips. If you sprinkle coffee grounds around your plants, the leaf cutters won't cross it. Just a hypothetical, but such tips often circulate. Or, a bit of vinegar at the doorway keeps the ants from entering the house. These small adaptations can make cohabiting with the ants more palatable. Of course, official responses would also occur. Pest control businesses would offer new services targeting these species. Communities might fund eradication in sensitive areas, like schoolyards or hospital grounds. But complete eradication, as we know, is very hard once such insects spread widely. Fire ants have never been eliminated, only controlled. So, the realistic end state is management and coexistence. Picture now a serene evening in one such community a decade on. A family sits on their porch, listening to cicadas. They know bullet ants live in the big oak by the mailbox. They've put a little sign there. Caution. Big ants, watch your step. Mostly out of humour because everyone on the street knows by now. The leafcutter ants have a nest in the empty lot down the road. In spring, when they release winged queens, local kids actually gather to watch because it's a spectacle of nature. hundreds of young queens and males taking off in the golden light. They've learned to protect their gardens with natural repellents, and the local garden club even printed a pamphlet on gardening in leaf-cutter country, sharing planting strategies. Down by the creek, an army ant colony passes through once in a while. Bird watchers have noted an uptick in some insectivorous birds that seem to know how to follow them, turning the event into a birding opportunity. When an army ant swarm does cross a road, people might even post on social media, "Ant swarm on Maple Street, avoid for next hour," the way one might warn about a flash flood or a wandering herd of cattle. It's become part of the fabric of life. This gentle normalization is key. Humans are remarkably adaptable, and in our narrative, we find ways to reduce the fear and inconvenience. In doing so, we also might find a kind of respect for these ants, acknowledging their power, but also their place in the natural order, even if that order has shifted into our backyard. Now that we've looked at both ecological and human impacts and how humans might adapt, it's time to consider the broader picture of how native species and the invading ants interact over the long term. Adaptation, resistance, or coexistence from an evolutionary and ecological standpoint. We've touched on it a bit, but let's delve deeper into how nature itself might push back or accommodate these ants, and how scientists become part of that story. Then, with those insights, we'll be ready to wind down our journey with reflections on balance and resilience. When a new species enters an ecosystem, especially a potent one like these Amazonian ants, the initial period can be tumultuous, as we've described. But nature is not static. Native species don't simply give up and vanish. Through a combination of behavior, adaptation, and sheer resilience, many native organisms will find ways to coexist with, or even exploit, the newcomers. Likewise, the invaders themselves may change in response to novel challenges in their new home. In this section, we'll gently explore these dynamics, the clashes that give way to coexistence, and the possibility of adaptation and resistance developing over time. We'll think of it as nature's long, slow dance toward a new equilibrium. And to keep our tone peaceful, we'll highlight the hopeful aspects, creative solutions, surprising friendships, and the endurance of life. Nature strikes a balance. Perhaps after the initial spread of Amazonian ants, some native predators begin to take notice of the abundant protein packets these ants represent. For instance, consider the ant-eating birds in the southeastern US. Birds like quail or wild turkeys that scratch the ground for insects. They might at first avoid bullet ants after a painful peck or two, but maybe they start targeting leafcutter workers, which don't sting. A wild turkey might discover that a spadeful of leafcutter ant brood is a delicacy. In areas with leafcutter nests, we could imagine turkeys or armadillos frequently disturbing those nests to eat larvae. This natural predation could help keep the leafcutter populations in check. In some ecosystems, native predators can indeed suppress invasives. For example, native wasps in Guam attacking invasive fire ant queens, or birds in some places learning to eat invasive snails. So here, maybe within a decade or two, the leafcutter ants find that building gigantic nests is harder because something, an armadillo at night say, keeps digging them up. The result, leafcutter colonies might remain smaller or more scattered, limiting their impact. Meanwhile, native ants may evolve or respond in interesting ways. Ants are highly adaptable. Some might shift their activity patterns to avoid the times the invaders are active. Perhaps a native ant species that normally foraged in daytime moves more to twilight or night if the bullet ants, primarily nocturnal, are too dominant at night, or vice versa. Shift to early morning before it heats up when the Amazon ants are less active. Others might develop chemical defenses. We mentioned earlier the case of the tawny crazy ant that can detoxify fire ant venom with formic acid secretion. If two invasive ants can have such an arms race, it's possible a native ant could also figure out a trick. For instance, maybe some native formica ants that spray formic acid could use that against bullet ants effectively, deterring them with a well-aimed spray to the face. Or a certain small ant might learn to sneak into leafcutter nests and steal fungus or brood. There are ants known as social parasites that do this to leafcutters in South America. Perhaps a native relative could take on that role opportunistically. Through natural selection, those native ants that can coexist with or even prey upon parts of the invaders' colonies will thrive, while those that directly compete and always lose will diminish. Over a longer span, many generations of ants, which might be just a few decades for us, we could see the ant community structure shift to incorporate the invaders. Diseases and parasites also rarely stay behind. The Amazonian ants in the US initially left their parasites and diseases in South America. But over time, some might catch up. For example, bullet ants in the Amazon have that tiny phorid fly that parasitizes injured workers. If someone were to import a plant or item carrying those phorid flies, or they eventually make it naturally, perhaps via wind or other hosts, they could establish and start affecting bullet ants in the new range. Scientists might even intentionally introduce specific natural enemies. For instance, just as they released decapitating phorid flies to control fire ants in the US, they might rear and release phorid flies that target leafcutters or army ants. If done carefully, ensuring those parasites won't harm native species, this could be a game changer, imposing the same checks on the invaders that they had back home. For instance, if a certain fungus disease that affects leafcutter fungus gardens could be introduced safely, it might spread in the invasive leafcutter populations and keep them at manageable levels. Hybrid and genetic adaptations. There's a theoretical possibility of hybridization if closely related species exist. The Texas bullet ant, Neopanera villosa, is native in the extreme south, not the same genus as the Amazon bullet ant, Parapanera, so no hybrid likely there. Leafcutters, however, do exist natively in parts of the southwest, Atta texana. If Atta texana meets Atta cephalotes, Amazon leafcutter, could they mate or exchange symbiotic fungi? Possibly not. They're different species. But they might steal each other's resources or even share enemies. For example, a parasite targeting one might also hit the other, effectively controlling both. Sometimes invasive species face unexpected resistance from native species that fill a similar niche. Maybe our native Texas leafcutter ant, being long adapted to local soils and climate, could outcompete the Amazon leafcutter in marginal areas, confining it to certain zones. Or maybe they'll partition territory. One prefers sandy soil, the other clay, etc. Competition among invaders. We also have to consider that the Amazon ants aren't arriving alone. The US environment already has other invasive ants like fire ants and Argentine ants in many places. These invaders could engage in wars with the new ones. For instance, fire ants versus leafcutters. Fire ants are omnivorous and might raid leafcutter foragers or attack their nests. Fire ants are known to attack other ant colonies. If fire ants swarm into a leafcutter nest opening, they could kill workers and brood, perhaps even forcing the colony to move or collapse. On the flip side, leafcutters have strong soldier ants that might cut and kill many fire ant workers with their powerful jaws. Who win such a confrontation might vary case by case. It's conceivable that in open sunny areas, fire ants keep leafcutters out, whereas in shaded groves, leafcutters manage to establish where fire ants are less dominant. Fire ants like open disturbed ground generally. The ecosystem might end up with a patchwork distribution where each ant finds its stronghold. There could even be a sort of equilibrium where one invasive keeps another in check. For instance, army ants might regularly raid fire ant mounds for the brood, thus weakening fire ant populations in some areas, ironically providing relief to native species that fire ants harmed. It's a complex food web, with invaders sometimes preying on invaders. The result might be that none of them can completely monopolize the environment, creating a rough balance. Learning and behavior change. Large-brained animals like birds and mammals often learn to cope with new threats. Raccoons or possums might quickly learn to identify bullet ants by smell or movement and avoid them, preventing stings. That means fewer accidental conflicts and fewer bullet ants being killed by annoyed larger animals. Some animals might even utilize the invaders as protection or tools. There are cases in nature of birds using ant chemical defenses, like songbirds performing anting, where they let ants crawl on them to presumably get chemicals to deter parasites. Perhaps a bird in the new range finds that by perching near a bullet ant nest or army ant swarm, it benefits from fewer ticks or mosquitoes, as those might avoid the area with ant chemicals in the air. These are speculative, but nature is inventive. Adaptation in the invaders. The Amazon ants themselves might adjust to the new environment. They could, for example, start to have different breeding cycles in the US climate, maybe timing nuptial flights to hurricane season rains or warm spells. If there are any genetic variations, natural selection might favor those that handle cooler nights or drier conditions better, gradually making the population more locally adapted. This could let them expand their range a bit, e.g., leafcutters creeping slightly farther north over years as they get a tad more cold tolerant. On the other hand, if they face strong predation or competition, perhaps only the wariest, least aggressive colonies persist. Maybe bullet ants in Florida become a bit shyer, nesting deeper to avoid people and predators, thereby stinging humans even less often. In scientific terms, the system may reach a state where the invaders' populations are regulated by a combination of factors: predation, competition, disease, and climate. They won't necessarily be eradicated, but they might settle to moderate levels rather than infinite expansion. This has happened with some invasive species after an initial boom. Eventually, they settle into the ecosystem's fabric at a density lower than the worst fears, due to these limiting factors. The role of humans in adaptation. Humans are part of this adaptive landscape too. Scientists might breed a resistance in certain crops to leafcutter damage, perhaps selecting plant varieties that have antifungal compounds unpalatable to leafcutters so they avoid those crops. Or they might develop targeted biopesticides, like a bait laced with a slow-acting fungus specific to leafcutter gardens. Over time, these efforts can tilt the balance toward control. Communities could implement integrated pest management strategies regionally, like protecting key conservation areas from the ants while tolerating them in less sensitive zones. If a threatened native species is at risk, say a rare ground nesting bird in a wildlife refuge gets overrun by fire ants and now army ants, conservationists might put ant barriers around nest sites or use localized treatments to keep those sites ant-free. Let's imagine a specific story of adaptation. On a quiet summer night, a barn owl glides over a pasture. This owl has learned that on some nights, if it listens carefully, it can hear the rustle of an army ant swarm below. Why would an owl care? It discovered that these swarms flush out rodents in the grass. A mouse trying to escape biting ants might run into the open, right into the owl's talons. So this clever owl now follows ant swarms as part of its hunting strategy. In doing so, the owl thrives, perhaps raising more chicks, and interestingly, it also provides relief to farmers by catching rodents and also maybe scaring away some of the creatures that would have been attacked by ants around the farm. Another scenario. A population of Florida scrub lizards had been suffering because invasive fire ants ate many of their hatchlings. Now, bullet ants moved in on the same scrub ridge. Fire ants and bullet ants do not get along. The big bullet ants kill fire ant scouts they encounter, and their presence near fire ant mounds causes the fire ants to relocate. Maybe the fire ants find the chemical presence of bullet ants intolerable. As a result, that scrub lizard nesting area has fewer fire ants around, and more baby lizards survive. The bullet ants don't bother the eggs. They're too big to eat and buried in sand. Plus, bullet ants forage in trees mostly. So ironically, the invasive bullet ant becomes a sort of indirect protector for the lizards against the other invasive ant. Nature's balancing act can have such unexpected turns. Overall, envision that after, say, 50 years, the frenzy of invasion calms. The Amazonian ants are still present, but they have become part of the background. One element among many. In some places, they're common. In others, rare or absent due to climate or competition. The ecosystem hasn't collapsed. It has changed. Yes, but often change is the norm in nature. Some native species might have declined, but others have adapted or even benefited. Perhaps new symbioses have formed, like a native bird species now heavily reliant on following army ant swarms for food, almost like an ant bird in a different land. Perhaps the ants themselves have become a food source for some other creatures that figured out how to eat them safely. There are spiders in the Amazon that specialize on ants. Maybe a native spider in the US shifted to target these invaders. The intricate web of interactions slowly knits a new pattern that, while different from the original, is functional and, in its own way, balanced. From the human perspective, by this time, people have largely accepted the ants as part of the local fauna. Just as one might live in an area with venomous snakes and learn to be cautious but not panic, communities know how to live with these ants. Maybe they even take pride. Some might say, our town is home to the famous Amazon ant colony. We even have a festival for it. Humans can celebrate anything. One could imagine an ant day where, instead of fearing them, people, especially kids, have fun learning about them and maybe dressing as ants for a parade, turning what was scary into something educative and communal. This adaptation and coexistence theme shows our capacity to find equilibrium again. It doesn't mean there were no losses or that everything is exactly as before. Just that, over time, a kind of harmony can emerge even from disruption. And witnessing that process fosters a deeper appreciation of resilience in nature and in ourselves. Now we've journeyed through the full arc, from introduction to invasion, impacts to adaptation. It's time to gently draw to a close, wrapping up with reflections on the balance of nature and resilience, and easing the listener into a peaceful, hopeful frame of mind. We'll remind ourselves that even though we imagined a scenario of upheaval, at the end of the day, the world finds a way to go on, often with newfound wonders and lessons. Let's move to our concluding thoughts in a soft, calming tone to round off this bedtime exploration. By now, the lively surge of the Amazonian ant invasion has mellowed into a steady rhythm within the environment. Nature, humans, and the ants have gradually learned to coexist, each adapting in their own ways. As we begin to conclude our journey, let's take a moment to appreciate some of the gentle, even heartwarming scenarios that have emerged from what once seemed a fearsome prospect. Through scientific curiosity and a bit of imaginative foresight, many of those early concerns have been transformed into opportunities for understanding and wonder. The scientist in the moonlight. Picture a warm summer night at the edge of a Florida wetland. The air is thick with the croaks of frogs and the hum of crickets. Under a moonlit sky, a small group of entomologists, scientists who study insects, move quietly with red-filtered headlamps. Red light disturbs nocturnal creatures less. They are tracking an army ant swarm that is cutting through the swamp. It's a surreal sight. A ribbon of ants on the move, tiny reflections of moonlight glinting off their million bodies. The scientists speak in hushed tones, not out of fear, but out of respect and concentration. They have been studying this colony for months, mapping its movements, observing which native species follow it or flee from it. One researcher gently places a small sensor device on the ground in the path of the ants. It will record the sounds and perhaps even collect a few stray ants for later genetic analysis. These scientists are filled with curiosity and admiration. To them, this invasion has been not just a challenge to manage, but also an unparalleled chance to learn about collective behavior and ecosystem dynamics. They watch as the army ants bridge a small puddle with their bodies, a living bridge of ants, and marvel at such self-organization. They notice a Carolina wren hopping along behind the swarm, snapping up insects, a behavior never documented before these ants arrived. One scientist scribbles in a notebook, "Wren following swarm, 10:32 p.m. Possible emergent ant-following behavior in native birds." It's like witnessing evolution in real time. After the ants pass, the lead scientist, let's call her Dr. Nguyen, kneels down and with a soft paintbrush collects a few stray army ant workers into a vial. She plans to take them back to the lab to check for any microsporidian parasites. They're monitoring if any natural biocontrols are increasing in the ants, a sign that nature is keeping them in check. Dr. Nguyen stands and takes a deep breath of the night air. Instead of anxiety, she feels a sense of wonder. "We are living in a very interesting time," she whispers to her colleague. "Who would have imagined seeing something like this here?"